In March of 2026, an alien fleet took every network on Earth in under an hour. Satellites went dark. Fighter jets became scrap with wings. And inside a sealed mountain in Colorado, under 11,000 feet of granite and 40 years of snow, something that had never once been connected to anything was still waiting to be switched on. If you enjoy stories where humanity wins ugly, do me a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this one with somebody who needs it today. And drop a comment telling me what you think this country buried under that mountain. I read every single one. Now, let's move forward together and walk into the valley where all of this began. They did not open with weapons. That was the part nobody was ready for. The ships came out of the dark side of the moon on a Tuesday morning, and for 11 full minutes they did absolutely nothing. They did not fire. They did not broadcast a demand. They did not even slow down in a way that looked threatening. They simply spread out over the northern hemisphere, opened up something that every listening post on Earth recorded as a soft, wide, patient hum, and they listened. They called themselves the Ordinate. Humanity would not learn that name for another 2 hours. By then it would not matter much. The Ordinate did not conquer worlds the way people in movies conquered worlds. They did not burn cities to prove a point. They cataloged. They mapped every signal a planet produced, sorted it, ranked it, and then took the whole system by the throat in one clean motion. Radar, radio, global positioning, air traffic control. Fire control networks. Encrypted military links that 3 generations of very smart people had sworn were unbreakable. The Ordinate did not break them. They copied them and then they simply started answering. It took 41 minutes. At the end of those 41 minutes, the most advanced military the human species had ever assembled was standing in a parking lot with its keys in its hand, and no idea which car was its own. Fighters could not launch because their systems asked the network for permission, and the network was now somebody else's. Missiles could not find targets. Ships could not talk to each other. Drones turned around in the sky and flew calmly home to airfields that no longer existed. The Ordinate had not destroyed anything. They had just unplugged it. 900 miles from any of that, it was snowing on the Sawatch Range in central Colorado. Because in the Sawatch Range in March, it is always snowing on something. March is the cruelest month in the Colorado high country, and it is also the snowiest. People who have never lived there assume the mountains are worst in January. People who have lived there know better. January is cold and quiet. March is when the storms line up out of the southwest and come through one after another, dropping 2 and 3 feet at a time on a snowpack that is already the deepest it will be all year. March is when the avalanche cycle runs. March is when the pass is close for 4 days at a time and nobody is surprised. The town of Granite Fork sat at 9,400 feet, in a valley that ran north to south between 2 ridgelines that had been throwing rocks at each other for about 60 million years. That morning it had 1,100 residents, 4 feet of standing snow in the street, and a county plow driver who had been awake for 19 hours. Above the town, at 11,200 feet, the snowpack was closer to 9 feet, and the wind on the ridgeline was moving it around at 40 miles an hour. The high school gymnasium had been a shelter, a polling place, and a wedding venue. On that Tuesday, it became the forward command post for what was left of United States Northern Command in the state of Colorado. Because every hardened facility with a fiber line running into it was now considered enemy territory. Colonel Ray Halloran stood at half-court with a paper map taped to the floor and 40 pounds of useless equipment stacked against the wall behind him. Halloran was 53 years old, Air Force, and had spent most of his career being the man they sent when a plan had already fallen apart. He had a flat voice, a bad knee, and a habit of getting quieter the worse things got. That morning he was very quiet. "Say it again," he said. The young lieutenant swallowed. "Sir, we have no air." Anything with a data link is grounded. Anything without a data link is a trainer, a crop duster, or a museum piece. And the Ordinate. 6 landers confirmed in the state, 4 on the plains. 2 in the mountains. They are not attacking population centers. They are walking a grid, sir, like they are looking for something. Halloran looked down at the paper map. Paper. In the year 2026. He had been mocked for keeping paper maps in a storage locker for 11 years, and he had never once been more right about anything in his life. They are not looking, he said. They already looked. Now they are collecting. Outside, the wind changed direction and threw a sheet of loose snow against the gymnasium windows. Somewhere south of town, a sound rolled up the valley that was not thunder and was not an engine. It was low and wide, and it made the basketball hoops hum. That was when Captain Neil Baxter came through the gym doors with a cardboard box under his arm, and the expression of a man who had just found a $20 bill in a coat, and was not sure it was. Legal to keep it. Baxter was 38. He was a records officer. In 14 years of service, exactly nobody had ever run toward him with urgent news, and he had made peace with that. "Colonel," he said, "I need 90 seconds, and I need you to not laugh. I have not laughed since Sunday." Baxter set the box on the scorer's table and pulled out a folder. It was gray, it was soft at the corners, and it had a metal clasp that had corroded shut. He had cut it open with a pocket knife. This came out of the archive annex in Pueblo, not the server. The basement. It has never been scanned, because scanning it would have required somebody to request the budget, and nobody has requested that budget since 1998. "Captain, Program Dragon," Baxter said. "Site 14, Sawatch Range, sealed February of 1996. Halloran took the folder. Inside were 40 pages of typed text, a hand-drawn elevation profile, and one photograph. The photograph was black and white, and slightly out of focus. And it showed something long and dark, and means sitting in a rock chamber with men standing around it who did not come up to the height of its landing gear. "What is it?" Halloran said. "Honestly, sir, nobody knows anymore. It was never in the inventory system. It was never in the aircraft registry. When they canceled it, they did not archive it. They deleted every reference to it, because the whole point of the program was that it did not exist." Halloran stared at the photograph for a long moment. "Say that last part again." "It is not on any list," Baxter said. "Anywhere, not ours. Not anybody's. And in a gymnasium in a mountain town, with an alien empire methodically reading every record humanity had ever written down." Colonel Ray Halloran finally understood exactly what he was holding. He folded the photograph into his jacket and looked out the window, up at 9 feet of March snow, sitting on a mountain that no longer appeared on any map in the world. "Find out who is still alive that ever touched this thing," he said. "And find me something that can get up that valley, because a truck is not going to do it." The answer to the first question was going to be one man. And that man had not spoken to the United States Air Force in 30 years. Halloran got 4 people and 3 snowcats. In fairness, that was more than he expected. Master Sergeant Dutch Coyle was the first name on the list, because he was the only aircraft maintainer in the state who had gone through a program that no longer had a name. Coyle was 57, built like a fire hydrant, and had spent 31 years putting his hands inside machines that were trying to bite him. He arrived at the gym in a canvas coat, carrying a toolbox that weighed more than the lieutenant. And his first act as a member of the operation was to look at the photograph for 8 seconds and go completely pale. "Well," he said, "there she is." "You know it," Halloran said. "I was 19. I did 2 years at a place they told me was a water treatment study." Coyle set the toolbox down very carefully. "Colonel, I have been telling that story at bars since 1997, and not one person has ever believed me." Chief Warrant Officer Marty Voss was second. Voss was 44, hydraulics and airframe systems, and he was the quietest person any of them had ever worked with. He did not use a tablet. He did not use a phone if he could avoid it. He carried a paper notebook in his chest pocket, and he wrote down everything, every pressure reading, every torque value, every part number, in small square handwriting that never got faster and never got sloppy. Coyle had made fun of that notebook for 9 years. Coyle would never make fun of it again. Staff Sergeant Owen Pike was third, on loan from the Colorado National Guard, 26 years old, and dangerously happy about all of this. Pike was an engineer, which in his case meant he had a legal reason to be around explosives, and had never once been told no in a way that stuck. "Sir," Pike said, reading the folder over Baxter's shoulder. "It says here the site was sealed with structural charges." "It does, so somebody has to open it." "Yes." Pike smiled the way a golden retriever smiles at a tennis ball. The snowcats came from a ski area 2 valleys over, driven down at first light by a mountain operations manager who asked exactly one question, which was whether he was getting them back, and who accepted the answer without complaint. They left Granite Fork at 11 in the morning and they went up the valley at 8 miles an hour. That was the top speed. 8 miles an hour, on tracks, in a machine built to groom ski runs, with the heaters roaring and the wind pushing snow across the windshield in long horizontal ropes. 22 miles of that. Baxter did the math out loud, discovered it was going to take most of the afternoon, and then sat quietly with the realization that the defense of the United States was currently moving slower than a man could jog. "Sir," Pike said at hour 2, "I want to say for the record that this is the coolest thing I have ever done and also the slowest." Noted. Both at once. It is confusing. The road did not exist. It had not existed since November. What existed was a rough line through the trees where the road was supposed to be, and Coyle navigated by treeline and by memory, and by a paper map that Halloran held open on his knees. And twice they had to stop and back down and come at a slope from a different angle, because the snow on the first angle had a hollow sound to it that Coyle did not like. "Slab," he said, "it will let go if we cut across it. I am not dying to an avalanche in front of aliens. That is embarrassing." Twice they saw the ordinate. The first time was a lander, 4 miles east, sitting in a snowfield on 3 legs like a white ceramic table somebody had abandoned. It was the size of a warehouse, and it had no visible seams anywhere on it. Figures moved around its base in a formation so perfectly even that it did not look like a group of individuals. It looked like a machine that happened to have people-shaped parts. The second time was closer and worse. 2 of them stood at the edge of the timber in snow up to their thighs, absolutely still, faces covered by smooth white plate with no eyes and no mouth. Against 9 feet of March snow, in white armor they were almost invisible. They did not react to the snowcats at all. Baxter checked his watch afterward and worked out that they had been in plain view for 11 seconds. "Why did they not stop us?" he said. Coyle spat into a cup. "Because 3 ski groomers on a road that has not been plowed since Thanksgiving is not on their list either." Site 14 was a slab of concrete set into the base of a granite face, roughly the size of a 2-car garage, with a steel personnel door and absolutely nothing else. There was no fence. There was no sign. There had never needed to be because the entire security concept of the place had been the fact that nobody knew it was there. It was also, at that moment, under 11 feet of snow. They found it with a probe pole after 40 minutes of digging in the wrong place, and Pike went at the drift with a shovel and a level of personal aggression that Halloran chose not to comment on. The main doors were 400 feet up the slope and about 90 feet wide, and they had been buried under blast rubble in February of 1996 by people who had been extremely thorough. Now they were under blast rubble and a winter's worth of loaded snow. Pike went up to look and came back grinning. Good news, they did not weld them. They just dropped the shelf on top of them. And the bad news? The bad news is there is a mountain on your airplane and about 9 feet of March snowpack on the mountain. And every bit of that is sitting on a slope angle of 38 degrees. Pike wiped his face. "Sir, that entire slope is one loud noise away from coming down." "Is that a problem?" Pike thought about it honestly. "Sir, it is going to be a problem for exactly one of us, and I am fairly sure it is not going to be us." They went in through the personnel shaft. It took Pike 40 minutes and 1 charge that he described as modest, and which removed Coyle's hearing for the next hour. Behind the steel door was a stairwell that went down 260 steps into rock that had not been breathed on since the Super Bowl was in Tempe. The emergency lighting was long dead. They went down with hand lights, and the air got warmer, and it smelled like cold metal and old rubber and dust that had never been disturbed by weather. At the bottom was a blast door standing open, because somebody in 1996 had walked out and never bothered to close it. And beyond the blast door was the chamber. Coyle found the mechanical breaker panel by memory, which was its own kind of miracle, and threw 4 levers in sequence. Somewhere behind the wall, a diesel generator that had been sitting on standby fuel for 30 years coughed twice, thought about its options, and caught. The overhead lights came up 1 bank at a time, and every man in that chamber stopped talking. She was 111 feet long. She sat on landing gear that put her belly at the height of a man's shoulders, and she was painted a flat black that had gone gray with dust. Two enormous intakes at the front. A thin needle nose with no radar in it. Wings that were barely wings at all, more like knives that had been welded on as an afterthought. Titanium skin, hand-rolled, with rows of visible rivets that somebody had installed one at a time. On the nose, under the dust, somebody had painted a dragon. Not a good dragon. A cheap, angry, grinning cartoon dragon done by a 19-year-old with a brush and no talent. Under it, in stencil, 3 words. Dragon 1. DELANEY. XF-121, Baxter read from the folder, his voice strange. High-altitude interceptor, design 1969, first flight 1971. Service ceiling stated as 78,000 feet, which the file notes is, quote, conservative. No onboard computer, no radar, no transponder, no data link. Flight controls are cable and hydraulic. Navigation is by chart, compass, and window. Halloran walked the length of her without saying anything. Sergeant, he said finally. Can she fly? Coyle put one hand flat on her flank, the way a man touches a horse he used to know. She could fly tomorrow if we had fuel, pressure in the number 2 system, about 9 hours of heat in this rock, and a pilot. He turned around. And that last one is your problem, Colonel. Because there is exactly one man on this planet who ever got this thing off the ground and back down again in the same condition. Where is he? Coyle almost smiled. 20 miles up this valley, snowed in since December. And the last time the Air Force called him, in 1996, he told them where to put the receiver. Frank Delaney lived at the end of a road that had not been a road since the first week of December. Behind a woodpile the size of a garage, and a hand-painted sign at the gate that said no. He was 61. He came out onto the porch with a mug in one hand before the snowcats had even stopped, because at that time of year he could hear a machine coming for 2 miles. And he stood there in a flannel shirt and a wool cap with snow blowing sideways past him, looking at 3 government vehicles the way a man looks at a bill he already paid. Absolutely not, he said. Mr. Delaney, I know what that looks like. I have known what that looks like since I was 31. Absolutely not. Halloran got out anyway and sank to his thigh in the snow and had to be helped back up by Pike, which took some of the authority out of the moment. Sir, aliens have landed in this valley. I am aware. One of them walked through my back 40 on Tuesday and looked at my woodpile for 20 minutes. Delaney drank some coffee. Did not take any. Just looked rude. Coyle stepped down out of the second machine. Delaney's face changed. It was a small change, but it went all the way through him, and it took about 3 seconds. Dutch, he said. Frank, you put on weight. You lost hair. I earned this hair loss. Delaney set the mug on the rail. He was not looking at Coyle anymore. He was looking past him, up the valley, at a mountain with a shelf of blast rubble on its shoulder, and a white loaded slope sitting above it. You went up there. We went up there. Is she still standing on her own gear, or did the struts finally let go? Standing, Coyle said, dust on her. Mouse nest in the left intake, which I am choosing not to think about, otherwise standing. Delaney was quiet for a long moment. The wind came down off the ridge and moved through the bare aspens, and somewhere far to the south there was a sound that was not thunder. They told me it was a waste, he said, 30 years ago. Sat me in a room in Virginia and told me the program was a dead end. The airframe was obsolete, and the future was networks and information. Told me I had spent my whole career flying a beautiful mistake. He picked the mug back up. I have thought about that sentence every day since. Halloran took the photograph out of his jacket and held it up in the wind. Sir, they took the networks, all of them, in 41 minutes. Everything we ever wrote down, everything we ever connected to anything, they read it and they own it. There is not one aircraft in the United States inventory that can get off the ground and stay useful. Delaney did not move. But she was never in the inventory, Halloran said. She was never in a database. She was never on a list. She is the only thing this country ever built that they cannot look up. The old pilot stood on his porch in the cold for what felt like a very long time. Then he went inside and came back out wearing boots and got into the snowcat without saying a single word. They were back at Site 14 an hour after dark, and Delaney walked the aircraft the way a surgeon walks a patient, slowly, touching almost nothing. stopping in places that made no sense to anyone but him. 4 problems, he said at the end of it. Go. 1. Fuel. She does not burn what anything else burns. Special blend, high flash point, and you cannot make it in a bathtub. Coyle raised a hand. Solved. 22,000 gallons in the buried bladder tank under the west wall. Sealed. Nitrogen blanketed. I checked it and it is still good because the men who put it in were serious people. 2. Heat. Delaney put his bare hand flat against the aircraft's skin and left it there. It is 9 degrees in this chamber. Every seal in this airframe is 30 years old, and every one of them is frozen solid right now. If I put pressure into cold lines, they will not flex. They will split, and then I am not flying anything. Coyle nodded slowly. 6 space heaters and the generator exhaust. 9 hours, maybe 10, to bring this rock up to 50. Then we have 9 hours. 3, Delaney pointed at the ceiling. Those doors. 90 feet of steel with a mountain leaning on it, and the number 2 pump station has been dry since Clinton. Voss looked up from his notebook. I can bring number 2 up. How long? 6 hours if nothing fights me. And 4. Delaney turned around and looked down the length of the chamber into the dark. There is no runway on this mountain. Baxter cleared his throat. Sir, the file mentions a launch tunnel. The file is being polite. Delaney started walking and everybody followed him. And the chamber narrowed into a tunnel that ran level for 400 feet, and then simply stopped at a wall of rubble. Past that is 900 more feet of tunnel, and past that the tunnel comes out of the side of this mountain about 2,000 vertical feet above the valley floor. On a ramp with a 9-degree down angle, and then there is nothing. Pike leaned forward. Nothing, nothing. You come off that lip at about 200 knots, which is not flying speed for this airplane, and you drop. You drop for 11, maybe 12 seconds into a canyon, and somewhere in there the wings decide whether they want to work. Delaney looked at them. We did it 4 times in 1994, twice with me. The Air Force stopped counting it as a takeoff and started counting it as a controlled fall. Nobody said anything. There is also, Baxter added carefully, the matter of what is currently in front of that opening. Pike had already thought about it. Cornice, sir. 30 years of snow loading off a west-facing lip. There's going to be a plug in that hole 8 to 15 feet thick, and it is going to be ice, not powder. He was already smiling. I can absolutely get rid of that, without bringing the slope down on the site. Sir, I said I can get rid of it. I did not say anything about the slope. They worked through the night. Voss went into the number 2 pump station with 3 lamps, a wrench roll, and his notebook, and did not come out for 5 hours. Coyle set 6 industrial heaters along the flanks of the aircraft and stood a fan at the intakes and walked the length of her every 20 minutes with the back of his hand against the skin, calling out temperatures like a man reading a fever. Delaney went up the ladder and sat in a cockpit he had not sat in since 1996 and put his hands on the throttles and did not come down for 2 hours, and nobody went up to ask him why. Baxter, who had never in his life been useful during a crisis, sat under a lamp and copied every page of the startup procedure onto index cards in block capitals. Because Delaney had said one sentence that stuck in all of their heads. If it is plugged into something, they can take it. If it is on paper, they have to come and get it. At 4:40 in the morning, deep in the mountain, in air that had finally crawled up to 48 degrees. Marty Voss opened a valve, and the number 2 hydraulic system came up to 2,900 pounds of pressure for the first time in 30 years. It was a small sound, a pump in a room in Iraq. 11 miles away, out on the flats below the range, a white ceramic lander that had been sitting still for 11 hours slowly turned its entire body until it was facing the mountain. They came up the drainage at first light, and they did not bother being quiet about it. Pike saw them first from the shoveled pit at the personnel door, and his report was, in Halloran's later opinion, the most professional thing the young man ever said. Sir. 11 contacts moving in line up the drainage. They are walking in step. It is extremely unsettling, and I would like everyone to know that. Distance. 900 meters and closing. Sir, they are walking on top of the snow. 9 feet of unconsolidated March snowpack, and they are not sinking. I do not know how, and I do not like it. Halloran had 4 rifles, 1 machine gun that Pike had liberated from a guard armory under a legal theory nobody had time to examine, and the terrain. The terrain was the whole plan. To reach Site 14, the ordnate had to come up one open bowl at 11,200 feet, in the open, in the wind. At an altitude where their landers could not hover efficiently, because the air was simply too thin to push against. They had left the lander 3 miles below and walked, and that had already cost them 2 hours. They had also, without knowing it, walked into a ground blizzard. The wind on the ridge above was moving at 45 miles an hour, and it was picking loose snow off the crest and throwing it out across the bowl in a moving white wall 200 feet high. And it had cut the line of sight to their relay down to almost nothing. Halloran put Pike and the machine gun in the concrete lip of the old drainage culvert. He put Baxter, who had not fired a rifle since basic qualification, behind a boulder with instructions to shoot in the general direction of the enemy and not to feel bad about it. He put Coyle inside the door with the toolbox, because Coyle had informed him that he was a maintainer, not infantry, and that he would be going back to work now, thank you. Then Halloran lay down in the snow with a rifle and waited. The ordnate came up the bowl at the same steady pace, all 11 of them perfectly spaced. They moved beautifully. It was genuinely impressive, right up until the second when Pike opened fire, and the whole formation did the same thing at the same time, which was exactly the wrong thing. They all dropped to one knee, all 11, simultaneously, in an open bowl with no cover in it whatsoever. "Oh," Pike said in the tone of a man who has just been handed a gift. "They are on the group plan." The white armor was good, rifle rounds hit it and skidded. But the machine gun at 90 meters, into a stationary line, was a different conversation entirely, and 3 of them went down before the group decided on a new posture. Then they returned fire, and the fight stopped being funny. Their weapons put out a blue-white bolt that hit like a thrown anvil and turned 9 feet of snowpack into a column of steam in under a second. The boulder Baxter was behind lost its top 4 feet. The culvert took 2 direct hits and Pike came out of it sideways, rolling with his coat smoking. "I am fine," he shouted. "I am on fire, but I am fine. Those are separate issues." Halloran shot one through the gap under the arm, where the plate had to move for the joint to work, and learned 2 things. First, that the gap was there. Second, that it took 4 rounds. He also learned something better. When the third one fell, the remaining 7 all turned their heads to the same spot at the same instant. Every time one of them was hit, all of them looked. They were not 7 soldiers. They were 1 soldier wearing 7 bodies, and the soldier had a very short attention span. "Pike," he called, "do not spread your fire, pick one. Make them all look at it." It worked for 4 minutes. 4 minutes was almost enough. Then the wind on the ridge dropped for 90 seconds the way March wind does, and the blowing snow settled, and the line of sight to their relay came straight back. The surviving ordnance stopped moving like a committee and started moving like professionals. 2 of them flanked left through the rocks. One of them put a bolt straight through the steel personnel door, which was, at that exact moment, the only thing standing between the ordnance and the number 2 pump station, where Marty Voss was on his back under a manifold with a pressure gauge in his teeth. Voss did not come out. He had 11 minutes of work left on the door actuator circuit, and he had written every one of those steps down in his notebook the night before, and he did them in order. The chamber took 3 more hits. A section of the rock ceiling near the pump station came down in a slab the size of a car. At 7:14 in the morning, 90 feet of steel door, buried under 30 years of rubble and 1 winter of snow, began to move. 9 feet of March snowpack on a 38-degree slope had been waiting since December for exactly this. The whole face let go at once. 400 vertical feet of slab avalanche came off that shoulder in a single sheet, took the blast rubble with it, took the 2 flanking ordnance with it, and ran 2,000 feet down into the timber below, and the sound of it rolled down the valley and was heard in Granite Fork 20 miles away. When the powder cloud finally settled, there was daylight in the chamber for the first time since February of 1996. Coyle got to the pump station first. He came back out about 90 seconds later, and he did not say anything at all. He just held up the notebook, and it had rock dust on it, and the last page was finished, and the last line on it was a pressure reading and a check mark. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Delaney, already at the top of the boarding ladder, said 1 word. Ladder. Coyle put the notebook in his own chest pocket and climbed. The startup was 51 steps, on index cards in block capitals. Read out loud by Coyle, standing on the ladder in the wind, while Baxter held the cards and Pike put out the fire in his own coat with a double handful of snow. Battery on, inverters, fuel boost left and right, bleed air, ignition on number 1. Deep in the mountain, something enormous and 30 years asleep drew in a breath of freezing March air. The number 1 engine lit, with a sound that started as a growl in the rock and became a physical pressure on the chest of every person standing there. Number 2 lit 8 seconds later. And 200 miles away, in the sky above the Continental Divide, every sensor the ordnance had turned toward a mountain in central Colorado at exactly the same time. Delaney's voice came down from the cockpit, calm as a man ordering breakfast. Dutch. How much tunnel did the kid clear? Coyle keyed the intercom and did the math, and for the first time all morning he hesitated. 900 feet, Frank, and how much do I need? 1,100. Delaney thought about that for exactly 2 seconds. Then I will be slow off the lip, he said. Get off my airplane. Coyle got off the airplane. He pulled the ladder, and he pulled the chocks by hand because the tow tug had been dead since 1996. And he stood back against the rock wall with Halloran and Baxter and Pike as 111 feet of black titanium began to roll. 1,400 feet down that tunnel, at the very lip of the mountain, Owen Pike's charges had already gone off 9 minutes earlier and removed an ice plug the size of a house. A hole in a cliff face that had been sealed by 30 winters was now open to the sky, and cold air was pouring down the tunnel toward the engines like a river finding a new channel. She went down the tunnel slowly at first, then not slowly. The sound in that enclosed rock was beyond anything any of them had a word for. Pike put his hands over his ears and screamed something nobody heard and nobody has ever asked him about. The light fixtures along the tunnel wall shook out of their brackets one after another, in sequence like a wave. She came off the lip at 181 knots into a snow squall 2,000 feet above the floor of the canyon, and she dropped, 11 seconds, 12. Halloran would say later that he had already started to look away. At 13 seconds, 400 feet above the tops of the snow-loaded lodgepoles at the bottom of the canyon, the wings finally found enough air to have an opinion, and the nose came up. And the XF-121 pulled out of the dive so hard that the shockwave went down the canyon and stripped the snow off every tree in it in one continuous white explosion, 4 miles long. Then she went up. She climbed at an angle that did not look survivable, straight up the face of the ridge, and she was through 18,000 feet before the sound of her leaving finished rolling out of the canyon. Pike quietly said, "Okay." Halloran said nothing. He was watching a black shape get smaller against a very blue March sky, and he was thinking about a room in Virginia in 1996 where somebody had used the word obsolete. Above the Continental Divide, at 52,000 feet, the ordnance command vessel held station in air so thin it was barely there. It was 9 miles long, and it was white, and it was the reason nothing on Earth worked. From its underside, a wide open aperture pointed straight down at North America, and poured out the field that had eaten every network on the continent. The aperture could not be closed while it was transmitting. That was not a design flaw. That was simply physics, and the ordnance had never once needed to care about it, because in 1,100 years of doing this, nothing had ever come at them from above. Prime Ordinal Cavith was, by the standards of his people, a very good officer. He had catalogued 19 worlds. He had never lost a single one. His instruments at that moment were showing him an unassigned contact climbing through 41,000 feet at Mach 2.4. His systems checked it against the human aircraft registry, which they had held complete and verified for 9 hours. No match. They checked it against the human civil registry. No match. Against every historical airframe in every archive on the planet. No match. Against the maintenance databases, the procurement records, the flight plan servers, the parts inventories, the training schedules, the retirement rolls. No match, no match, no match. And so, exactly as it had been designed to do, the system did the sensible thing. It classified the contact as instrument error and it stopped displaying it. Their instruments saw her. Their doctrine deleted her. Frank Delaney went to 71,000 feet, which was 19,000 feet above the largest object in the sky, and he rolled inverted so he could see it out the top of the canopy. Because the XF-121 had no radar and never had, and he had been trained in 1994 to find things the way pilots found things in 1944, by looking out the window with his own eyes. It was not hard to find. It was 9 miles long and it was glowing. He had no missiles that would help. He had a gun. And he had 144 unguided rockets in an internal bay, built in 1970 to be dumped into a formation of Soviet bombers by a man who did not have time to aim. He rolled upright, put the nose down, and came off the top at a 50-degree dive. The ordnance had close-in defenses. They were excellent. They were also mounted to engage threats coming from below and from the horizon, because for 11 centuries that had been the only direction threats came from. And they could not elevate past 60 degrees. Cavith's crew saw the dive begin at 11 miles. They reported it. The system, which had already decided the contact did not exist, filed the report. At 2 miles at Mach 2.6, in a shallow black arrow with hand-rolled rivets and a badly painted dragon on the nose, Frank Delaney opened the bay and let go of all 144. He did not need explosives. At that speed, a steel tube weighing 40 pounds does not need to be clever. The first 30 went into the open aperture. The rest went in behind them. The field over North America did not fade. It snapped, the way a rope snaps, and every radio on the continent came back at once with a wall of noise that made grown men take their headsets off. The command vessel came apart from the inside out, along 9 miles of its own spine. And Frank Delaney, pulling out at 19,000 feet with debris the size of houses going past him in both directions, took a hit from a fragment through the number 2 engine intake and immediately lost half his airplane. Fire warning. Hydraulic pressure gone on one side, the whole aircraft yawing hard right and trying very seriously to roll onto her back. Down at Site 14, the handheld radio on Halloran's belt, which had been dead for 9 hours, crackled to life for the first time all morning. It was Delaney's voice, and it was calm, and it was tight. "Dutch!" Coyle grabbed the radio out of Halloran's hand. "Frank, number 2 is gone, and I am on fire, and I have got about 4 minutes of usable airplane left underneath me." A pause. "How is she looking from down there?" Coyle looked up. 19,000 feet above him, in a hard blue sky over 100 miles of white mountains, a black shape was coming down trailing a long line of smoke across the entire state of Colorado. He keyed the radio. "She is looking beautiful, Frank." The counterattack took 11 hours. That was not a figure of speech, and it was not an exaggeration. 11 hours after the field snapped, every functional military network in North America was back up. Every satellite that had not been physically destroyed had been retasked. And the ordnance ground forces, which had spent 9 hours operating as a single organism with a single brain, discovered what it feels like when the brain goes away. They did not surrender well, mostly because they had never learned how. Without the relay, they could not coordinate above the squad level. And without coordination, they were small groups of very well-armored individuals standing in the open at 11,000 feet. In March, in a snowpack they did not understand, being engaged by people who had grown up in it. The last organized ordnance element in the state of Colorado was reduced by a guard company, 2 attack helicopters, and in one incident that the after-action report describes in unusually flat language, a rancher outside Buena Vista who was already out feeding cattle and simply did not stop driving. The surviving ordnance vessels left orbit inside 2 days. There was no final transmission. There was no threat of vengeance. As far as anyone has ever been able to determine, they simply removed Earth from the catalog and went home. Because the ordnance did not know how to file a world that had beaten them with something that was not in the file. Frank Delaney did not eject. He had 4 minutes of airplane, and he used all of them, because he was 61 years old, and he had thought about this exact situation every single day for 30 years. He brought her down out of the mountains on 1 engine, with half his hydraulics gone and a fire he could not put out. And he found the one thing in central Colorado in March that a man can put 111 feet of burning titanium down on, which is a frozen snow-covered flat 11 miles long on the far side of the Arkansas River Valley. He landed gear up at 190 knots. She slid for 6,000 feet, and the snow came over the wings in 2 long white waves. And the fire went out somewhere in the middle of it, because there was simply nothing left for it to burn that was not already buried. She came to rest with her nose in a stand of frozen rabbit brush, ticking and steaming. And Frank Delaney blew the canopy and climbed down the side of her and walked about 200 feet through knee-deep snow, and then sat down, because his legs had made an executive decision. That is where the guard found him 40 minutes later, sitting in the snow in a flight suit that was 30 years old, watching steam come off the last airplane he would ever fly. They asked him if he was hurt. He said, "I have been better." They asked him if he wanted to go to the hospital. He said, "I would like a cup of coffee, and I would like somebody to write down that she worked." Somebody did. Marty Voss was recovered from the pump station at Site 14 9 days later, once the avalanche debris had settled enough to be safe. There is a marker there now, a small one set into the rock beside the door, and it does not say very much, because the men who put it there were not the kind of men who said very much. His notebook is in a case at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, not because of what he wrote in it, because of what it proves. Dutch Coyle retired 8 months later, at 58, after 32 years. At his ceremony, they asked him to say a few words, and he stood up in front of 200 people and said, "Do not throw away the paper," and sat back down. Owen Pike was promoted, which surprised absolutely everyone, including Owen Pike. Neil Baxter, the records officer that nobody had ever run toward, spent the next 4 years leading the largest archival recovery effort in the history of the United States military. They found 9 more programs in basements. 2 of them are still classified. He has never told anybody what they are, and he never will, and he is extremely pleased about that. Colonel Ray Halloran was asked to testify 11 times. He said the same thing every time in the same flat voice, and eventually somebody put it on a wall. They knew everything we ever wrote down. So we beat them with the one thing we never did. If this story hit you the way it hit me, take 5 seconds and drop a comment. Tell me the line that stuck with you. Share it with somebody who would appreciate a story about the old machine that nobody bothered to delete. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Now, one last thing. 6 years later, a reporter made it up that same road in the spring, when it was finally passable, and found Frank Delaney behind the same gate with the same sign on it, and asked him the question everybody wanted to ask. She asked him how it felt, knowing that the most advanced military force in the galaxy had been beaten by an aircraft that was 55 years old. Delaney thought about it for a while. He was 67 by then. He had a bad shoulder and a worse knee and a dog that did not like visitors. They had every list there is, he said. Ours, theirs, all of them. They knew the name of every airplane this country ever put a number on. That is a real advantage. I am not going to pretend it is not. So how did you beat them? And the last American dragon looked up the valley at a mountain with a hole in the side of it. And he smiled for the first time in the entire interview. She was not on the list, he said.